And here we are with another episode of the Social Studies Show. We have Val Harvey, illustrious Hollywood hair and makeup artist, working in the advertising and entertainment industry on sets and shoots across the board for over 10 years. And she is here to tell us about her journey as a Black woman working in Hollywood in the advertising and entertainment industry. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got into the industry. And let's hear the stories.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, first of all, Stan.
Okay.
You've been always awesome to me, and I've loved working with you and doing projects with you. And just tell you a little bit about myself. I am an Afro-Latina woman.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in Panama. I won't say what here. But yeah, I only lived there briefly. I lived there for a few years. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, we moved to Alabama, which was interesting because that was a crazy experience for, these Afro-Latin people to move to the South who are familiar with racism, but like the South is like a whole different beast of racism, and we had to like figure it out.
It's not an Outkast album.
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. And like we just were completely unfamiliar. Okay. So anyway, though, and we did that because my dad was in the Army and he got stationed in Alabama. Okay. And so as soon as the station was over, we picked up and we moved to Los Angeles.
We up out of here.
We were so out, but like out of the fire and into a whole different other one. We moved to South Central Los Angeles.
Okay.
In the 80s, height of the Crips and the Bloods War. All kinds of craziness going on. And again, we were like very unfamiliar with like what was going on. Mm-hmm. And at that time, like, I think my mom was looking for a way to keep us super safe because my dad loved him to death, but he wasn't super present. So she discovered religion. And so we were Jehovah's Witnesses like for most of my adult years, which was an interesting journey. But as an artist, it was something that, I always showed an affinity towards art and a proclivity towards it at a very, very young age. Mm-hmm. And I wish I was encouraged more, but I never lost that love for beautiful things and creating things and just making things special.
Can we just stop for a moment and just look at this moment of like, look at this, like, look at these nails. Look at this thing right there. There's some special arts moments happening right here. You just take it with you wherever you go.
Well, it was funny because growing up, like I didn't, like I just, my interests were so different from everybody around me. Okay. Like I was a little Black girl living in South Central, but somehow I was like obsessed with the Beatles and obsessed with like, punk rock music. And, I loved all the other shit too. Can I say shit?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're grown-ups here.
Thank you. Okay. I loved everything else. I loved rap. I loved R&B. I loved all of that. I was like raised right, like I got into all that, but somehow my interest took me in just a very open direction. And so I think that was like really the key to like me really loving and exploring art in different genres. You know what I mean? Because I would read, not just Ebony magazine, I'd read Vogue magazine and I'd read, Jet, but I'd also, look at, just other things. Like I just was really interested in exploring all the world had to offer in the way of art and beautiful things and different narratives.
So how did that kind of like, that you've had this broad spectrum, right, of like this input, right?
Yeah.
So how did that bring you into singularity of focus into hair and makeup and specifically kind of like working in advertising and entertainment? Because like it's a job that hasn't been traditionally known, like the traditional standards of beauty. Yeah. It's kind of like when you're talking about like Vogue and comparing it to Ebony, like there's there's a disparity there, right?
Yeah.
And so you going into that path and then like what's led you to have success and just kind of some of the things that you've had along the way that kind of like on your journey.
Well, I mean, I mentioned those magazines because I was always fascinated by what the women look like and what the compositions of photographs, without even quite understanding that's what I was looking at, composition and placement and so much intention in those stories. And I always wanted to like model what was in the magazines.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I was very thoughtful about that whenever I chose clothing. And, you know, when I was trying to do my makeup, I was always trying to imitate what was in the magazines. But we all know what Vogue looks like and who was in those magazines. So it didn't quite.
There's an important part right there,
Yeah.
right? So here's a part where, when did you come to the realization to stop imitating and actually go and strike onto your own originality? Because I mean, obviously, from working with you and shooting, like you have a lot of originality that you brought to our shoots, right? And so for me, like there's a point where you stop trying to imitate, emulate, and you kind of like just imagine.
Yeah, well, because I started realizing that I wasn't going to be able to duplicate those things in the ways that were offered to me in those magazines. Because I would see this eyeshadow and I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And I'd go find something that was inexpensive, but aligned with what Vogue said was the best thing. And then I'd put it on and it looked like some ashy shit on me. So finally it started to connect. Oh, that's not going to be a path for me.
Yeah.
So if I want to do this, I need to figure out what that looks like for me. Yeah. And so I started like really getting that really, really clear. And so I had to be really untraditional in the ways that I explored makeup, because there weren't a lot of options in the 80s and the 90s for girls, you know, Black women or just women of color in general wanting to do their makeup. There was like Fashion Fair, which like, I love Fashion Fair, but it was also kind of trash. And then there was like Iman had her own makeup line, which it wasn't the best. Like it worked, the colors were good, but there wasn't a lot of, like I had to do things like use a lipstick as blush, or I had to use, you know, a mascara as eyeliner, because the eyeliner that, you know, was black really looked gray on me. So I had to be so creative when it came to my own makeup, and I got really good at it. And so then, you know, something clicked in me, because like up until that point, I was just kind of, you know, I because of the religion, and I mentioned that because my family didn't really have many aspirations for me outside of like being somebody's husband. Which, yeah, because it was just a very patriarchal religion that I was in. And so I didn't really think of myself as like, you know, making anything of art. Like I just kind of thought I was going to be Jehovah's Witness forever and be somebody's husband, be somebody's wife. But then I decided, like, once I started doing makeup and loving it, I was like, you know, maybe I can do this on other people. So I started like just playing with my girlfriends, and like I would do makeup for them. And then there was a wedding and I'm like, oh, you know, let me try to do the makeup. So I did it, and the bride loved it. And then I was like, could I actually make money at this?
Which is an interesting thing, because I think that's the part of like, for a lot of people in diversity, they're not aware of these jobs.
Yeah,
right?
for
so
sure.
So you're not even thinking about that as a path, because you don't even know. Like you can't even dream it, because like to be able to dream it, you've got to be able to like kind of see it and like be like, okay, I can emulate and have like our own kind of like heroes and set of like aspirations there. But if we've never seen it in that community, or where you grew up, or how your family was raised, you're kind of just like, it's kind of like trying to follow, like you're looking for the North Star in the night, right?
Yeah.
And like if you never don't know even to be looking for the North Star, it makes it really hard to go on that journey.
I didn't know what direction north was. And I mean, and that's why I brought up like the music stuff and all these things. Like there were so many things that found me. Okay. You know, because I was living in an area where nobody was interested in any of the things that I was interested in. No one did anything that had to do with makeup. Nobody did those things. So
how'd you break out of that mold then?
I don't know. I was just this weird little Black girl that was like, I don't know, I'm just going to see. And I just wasn't afraid. I found that a lot of people in my neighborhood were super afraid to venture out. And I don't know if it's kind of like I was okay with playing the game. Like I didn't mind integrating. Whereas a lot of people that I grew up with really were afraid, and rightfully so, because it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe where I was, and I recognized the immediate threat, but it seemed like everybody else was also comfortable with that threat, like the threat that they knew, that they were so afraid
of the threat that they didn't know.
Of the devil that they didn't know. And I'm like, I'm not into this devil right here. Let me see what this is, because I feel like I'll be fine. So that's just what I did. I was just like, you know, I went to Fred Siegel's 2-week makeup course. They don't even offer them anymore in Santa Monica. I paid for it myself. It was a couple grand. I just like saved up my money and I paid it in portions and I went, and they didn't even really teach me how to do makeup. They taught me how to look like a makeup artist, but they definitely didn't have anything on how to do black makeup.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But I was able to very quickly look like a makeup artist. And then from that, I parlayed that into working for Christian Dior. That was my first job. I somehow talked my way into being the counter manager with no makeup experience whatsoever and no retail experience. I talked my way into being the counter manager of the Bloomingdale's Christian Dior counter, which, by the way, Christian Dior makeup, I couldn't even wear it. Because they did not really have colors for me. Okay. And like, I did really well, surprisingly, you know? And so from there, I parlayed that position. I made friends within the store, and one of the girls was being promoted to being like an account executive of Laura Mercier, which is another makeup brand. And so she's like, I want you to come work with me at the counter in Beverly Hills at Neiman Marcus, which was a huge jump from Newport Beach. And also Orange County was not my jam. Like,
fair.
You know, it just wasn't, you know. So I moved into working in Beverly Hills in Neiman Marcus there, and I stayed there for like 8.5 years. No, 6.5 years I was there. And that was a truly interesting experience, but a lot of the contacts that I have now actually some of them like came from there. And that partly,
building relationships.
Exactly, it was building relationships. And then retail got to be like, I just can't do this anymore. It was terrible.
So, retail was not for you.
I mean, I came this close to like burning the counter down.
Okay. Let's talk way to exhale on this.
Yeah, no. I mean, it was very like put together. Okay. You know, because she can't do makeup from jail. Okay. But I did. Right. Oh my gosh. Right. Yeah, but like I did kind of leave dramatically, but
no way. You?
I mean, no, honestly, it wasn't even that dramatically. In my head, it was, but yeah, like it was dramatic because I essentially was like, fuck this. I'm gonna do this on my own. Like I am not gonna do like, because I was super popular as a makeup artist there. I was doing like 6 to 8 makeups a day. And I'm like, what if people actually paid me? You know, at the time I heard like 150, couple $100 instead of $23 an hour to do this. And so I was like, I'm gonna try that. Like sink or swim, I'm gonna do it. So I jumped, and eventually the net did appear. But that was a big risk for me, because once again, like by that time, I had left being a Jehovah's Witness. And when you leave being a Jehovah's Witness, like everybody like basically turns their back on you and essentially like prays for your failure so that you can come back. Like they cut you off. Not that I had like a ton of support anyway, but it was just like my relationships with my family was very strained. I couldn't, you know, go to them for any type of support in this venture. I didn't have any savings. I just left, you know, so
what was the guiding path? Did you have a mentor or like someone to come to help you? Like you just were like out there? I was just like, I messaged everybody who ever, you know, even mentioned that they had anything to do with makeup or the film industry that I met while I was in Neiman Marcus. I didn't get a ton of people back, but kind of randomly, I had worked on a gig for the Hollywood Christmas parade. No, actually, no. It was getting like producers and things ready for the Academy Awards. Okay. And so I had gotten a referral to do a woman's makeup, and I was very much in touch with her, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you're amazing! Like you asked me right back, blah blah." I'm like, yeah, because I have nothing else going on. But I was very attentive, I was very eager. I did the makeup. I did it for several people. I did it for like nothing practically. But she was a great contact because she ended up keeping in touch with me, and she was with this company called ATI. And that company produces a lot of content and films and TV shows and things like that. And so
I got my biggest break when I started working on the Marie Osmond show.
Okay.
And that was in like 2021, like maybe even, yeah, like 2029, 2020, 2019, I mean, like, yeah, 2019, 2020. And that was like a really great experience for me. And I kept in touch with all those producers. And like, you know how it is with TV shows. They just, you know, nothing lasts forever. You graduate for another show, you know, a great makeup artist, and you keep putting them on.
Yeah.
And so that was like kind of like the trajectory for me. And my name kind of like started spreading more and more in the industry. And that's how I built up a clientele and started meeting new people and figuring out, you know, certain experiences. But then I would run into and by that time, like basically all the people that I knew at Neiman's, and that was another incentive for me to leave. All my really good friends there had left, and they had carried on to freelance makeup artist careers. And that kind of like motivated me to start doing it. I'm like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. But then what I didn't realize is that they were all white, and like their experience was going to be very different, and their trajectory was going to be very different than mine. And so I've definitely noticed that it's taken me longer to get my footing than my other friends. Like one of my friends got plucked out of the, you know, off the makeup counter and put on tour with Madonna. And then she put one of our other friends on to do it too. And so it was just interesting, like that, it was great. And I felt like I had like the, you know, the world was my oyster when I was on Marie Osmond, but then looking back, like they didn't pay really great. It was more than I was making in retail, but it wasn't a great paycheck. It wasn't going to be sustainable either because the show only went for 2 seasons. And so I started to realize that, you know, like people were really grateful, and especially talent of color, because I would also do things like New York Fashion Week, and I would see anybody who in the show that was of color, they'd sit and wait for me to be done to try to jump in my chair, because they definitely saw that I was more prepared than the other makeup artists.
Is that a thing of a light bulb of kind of like the challenges of one, being a Black talent in entertainment, right? And having people who are out trying to make you look your best, right? And then for you trying to compensate for that, and also almost just being kind of like almost a safety net for those people, and like a relief for them, because all of a sudden, like, you know, it's like you see one-to-one and you're like, you know, and kind of like you're like, okay, like, and it's also a bit of comfort.
Yeah,
right?
I definitely saw the relief, and I saw the exhale whenever talent of color would see me. But I also definitely noticed that I wasn't seeing a ton of talent of color to begin with. And one of the things that I've definitely noticed, even to this day, is that a lot of corporations and networks, and they're definitely seeing the need for having a Black makeup artist who can do Black talent. But I think that they get a little bit of tunnel vision as well. Like, she can only do Black talent, or we only have her on when there's Black talent.
Well, that's the interesting thing, like looking at that as like photography, or like for my career, right? Because I came from outdoor sports, right? And it's kind of funny because it's an interesting thing of watching advertising and entertainment now, because like as much as we want to say it, and like we're all like on this cultural shift of like awareness and like wokeness and everything like that, right? Like being Black's on trend, right? It's like, it's not a trend, like it's a trendy thing, like, you know, and it's kind of like, we can talk about that more because it just made George Floyd, you know, honestly, it made a lot of people more aware, right? And so people started investing more into it. But the funny thing about that is it goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting dynamic of like looking at where people are like, oh, we're only going to hire you for this Black thing. And I'm like, well, I can shoot white people stuff too, because like that's what I spent a lot of my career doing. Like, it's like, because it's what I had to learn, because that's what I had to sell, right, as a photographer, right? So it's kind of funny of like trying to uplift diversity and bring that along, but also being like, I'm talented and I know I can do this too, like not being pigeonholed.
Yeah, you don't only have to call me when there's Black talent.
Like I can handle it all.
And especially because that's what the industry looked like when I started. Like I was only doing white people. I worked at Neiman fucking Marcus. Like, who do you think whose makeup I was doing? Who do you think I learned on? The experience that from Black people that I had was doing a Black woman's makeup every day, which is me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I understood how to do all those things because I am Black. And so I already had that standing knowledge. And, you know, but that's kind of a little bit of the bothersome thing for me, because before the pandemic, really, I was struggling. I was very much struggling. And I got an uptick in my jobs and just recognition after the passing of George Floyd. So it really took tragedy to really give my career some traction, because now all of a sudden people are like, oh, we do know a Black makeup artist. Like, they would think of me, you know, but it was this, you know, backhanded thing of like, I don't want to say backhanded, but like, I really appreciated people being more conscious of it now. But I was also like, did you guys not think I was talented before or capable? Right? Like, why did it take you so long to figure out that it, like, they're like, well, we just thought you were already busy. I'm like, okay, but also I was telling you this for a decade, that it's much harder for me because I'm Black. Like, it's not like I never said it. And I had friends like actually admit, they're like, we just didn't really want to believe that. It's just so hard to believe. Yeah, I'm like, well, now you do,
like,
though,
it's like a thing where, like, you know, before all that, people were like, racism doesn't exist, and you're like,
it was very that. It was very that. Oh, but you don't think it's changed? I'm like, no, I don't.
No.
I really don't.
I think that. So I think here's the thing on the flip side of that, like looking at that, like, right now that you are, you know, a woman of color on set and things like that, and I think the other dynamic of the shift of that, like after post George Floyd pandemic thing of that, right, is Black people on set and in entertainment and advertising all of a sudden having to answer for every type of question about racism or fact check or DEI check or kind of like explain culturally diverse moments on set for people, because people just hadn't done their own homework, right?
Yeah.
And I know for me, it's just like I don't know, I'm not 401 information, I'm a photographer, I'm here to help, but like some of you people need to go read some of your own books. You need to do your own history checking, you need to do your own thing. And so how did that like affect you, and how did that make you feel?
Well, after George Floyd passed away and there was this great awakening and realization, I shit you not, I had like at least like between DMs and text messages and phone calls, something like 100 to almost like 125 just messages up from white friends and white people that I didn't even know.
Literally, I turned my phone off.
Oh yeah, like messaging me about racism. Sorry about racism. Also, what do I do now? Like, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I? And also, like I wouldn't call myself a model, but I have been photographed for certain things, and all of a sudden, my picture starts showing up on certain ads. Like, I smoke weed, and I've done some like things for weed companies, which I didn't really ever see like more than one post about if they even used the photograph that I was in. All of a sudden, now they're using the photograph. Yeah. So, and they're tagging me, and I'm like, I wonder why that's I wonder why I'm trending now that way. And so it was, I don't know, I feel like the whole thing can be very bittersweet at times, you know, because
well, it has to be a catalyst, right? And like, and it's like you have to look at it from both ways, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes the horrific tragedy of thing wakes people up, and I mean, I hate to say wake because whatever, but it's just the word that was on my tongue. But it gives people a realization and a emphasis of their surroundings, and also the understanding that their surroundings might be different than other people's surroundings, and other people might be going through different things in their surroundings. Yeah. And the benefit of that realization is looking at community coming together to try and actually make things a better place, even though like it's a horrible catalyst. So it goes good and bad in both ways. Yeah. And like one thing that I found was really interesting, like for me, like going in those sets, you know, like a lot of times it forced really uncomfortable conversations, right? Because all of a sudden you're literally trying to school people on what systemic racism and overt racism and opportunity and what didn't have opportunity, like we're that. And I think what's really kind of like has been interesting to me is like a lot of people, like, you know, I'm like in that situation, have run from that challenge, right? And the thing that really like speaks volumes to me, which I think is really interesting, is like that you ran to that challenge, that you actually like on the occasion like that, you didn't just like, okay, I'm going to answer these questions instead. You went and got your certification of being a DEI instructor in the time, like from Cornell University. So like where a lot of people would run from that, you like leaned in and were actually, I'm going to make myself more valuable on these sets, on these advertising places, in these platforms, and in this space. I'm going to, from having such a vacuum, I'm going to move into this place and make my presence felt, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. So like,
Thank
I just so want to know, like, what was your mindset to be like, okay, I'm doing this?
Well, I mean, it was a couple things that motivated me, because I felt like I was never going to be able to fully escape that responsibility. You know,
and that's the truth. Like, it's just like you're going into the black hole.
Yeah, it's
like a questioning of people.
Exactly. It's like, you know, I mean, because I've always been so researched on it. I love to read. I read things about social justice a lot. I'm very much into psychology. I've learned how to really integrate both of those things, because I really do feel like they are so similar in the motivations behind why a lot of people are, you know, act racist in racist ways. You know, using that particular outlet is something that like you can dive into on a psychological level, and it will make a lot more sense to you, you know? And so I've always been able to speak about it well. I've always, and I think this is even because of my religious background, I've always been able to change people's minds and convince people, and to like really lay out an argument very well.
And also, it's like, it's interesting to like show perspective.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too that's really key, instead of just being like, oh, here's the things that, is getting people to understand why representation matters.
Yeah.
And like how to achieve representation in entertainment and advertising on both sides of the lens.
Exactly. And to really make it meaningful and not just performative.
Yeah.
And so the reason why, I mean, I knew that I was not going to be able to escape this. And one of the things I thought, you know, the difference between this being annoying, me sending out 100 responses and, you know, answering all these questions, the difference between it being annoying and not being annoying is going to be money, quite frankly. So pay me for that work, pay me for that labor. And I won't find it, you know, so irritating to like have to go into this diatribe and spend all this time and energy explaining this to you. Now I can legitimately be like, this is something that I do. And if you want me to expand on this, like you have to hire me and pay me for that labor and really invest in it, not just take the cliff notes or, you know, look at memes and repost, you know what I mean? Like really.
My black friend told me.
Exactly.
You know,
like really invest.
People who've done the work, like, you know?
Exactly. Really, truly do the work. And I can show you how to do the work, but that is also labor for me. And so that needs to be reflected in how I'm compensated as well. And so, yeah, like I said, I was already doing it. And so I'm just like, you know, this is, and like I said, I wasn't monetizing because I was wanting to be greedy. It was just, it is labor. It truly is labor.
I don't think people really understand, and this is something that I had to deal with, we're talking about earlier, is like, when all of that stuff happened, like your first inclination, like for me, and the way to do is like, you want to help everyone, you want to help with like everyone, and you want to try to make everything work. And like, I can like, you're like, I can save them attitude, right? And when you're taking on all those challenges and you're taking all these different challenges from people, it really started to bring on like just put me into a dark place, into like a psychological, because you're trying to save everything and you can't save everything. And also like you're taking on everyone's problems. And like, I don't think people really realize when they're like calling or asking, like when you're getting those 100 text messages from all your friends and that it is mentally and physically fatiguing, you know, because you're trying to like, it's like you want to help at the same time you want to protect your like your heart,
Yeah.
and your soul, because it's just like, it's like, because here's the thing that I think people don't understand when they're asking all those questions like that. We deserve to have joy in our life. We deserve to have fun. Like all of a sudden shouldn't be trying to fix everyone else's problems, right? And it's like, it's not my job to try and fix everyone else's problems all the time. Sometimes you need to go do the work yourself, because I've done the work and now I'm going to go have joy in my life because this is fulfilling for me, right?
Yeah.
And so now when people who haven't done the work all of a sudden are looking for a shortcut by trying to come to you or me and like, hey, can you quick solve our problem of like the thing, or can you explain racism in like these 10 bullet points, like, and it's like, it's not that easy. It's a lived experience. It's a studied experience. It's a reflecting on tangible goals of what I do with this output makes other people feel for the future goals, right? And I don't think people really think about that in that space of how psychologically coming to Black people with all the problems of trying to solve racism, like that really affects people's psyche in their day-to-day, right?
Well, also what I found a lot of the times, that there was about 25% of people who really wanted to learn and understand, and the other 75, right? I'm being generous.
Okay, let's say 15.
But then the other 75% just wanted a Black person to basically tell them that it's not you.
Validate them.
They wanted me to validate them and tell them that they weren't racist and that they actually didn't have to do the work.
Yes, and that's not the case.
And that's basically like where I was like, all right, like I'm gonna teach you, but I'm also not going to mince my words.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna call you out as well if you need to be called out. I don't care if your husband's Black. I don't care if you have Black kids. I don't care about any of that, because that like does not equal automatically that you're not racist. I don't care if you have a Black friend, because guess what? The last time that I read any book, it was not the enslaved people getting in bed with the masters. It was the other way around. And so, and tons of, white people, they had Black friends, during times where slavery was happening, and they would give them up if they had to, you know what I mean? To save face. Like nothing really was going to happen to them, but they would sacrifice you. They put you on that chopping block. They did it to their own children. You know what I mean? So don't come to me and say, oh, this is the work that I've done. No, because a lot of the times I'm like, do you really want a Black family, or do you just want a Black husband or wife? Or do you know what I mean? Like,
well, it's the funny thing, like, and here's the whole thing, right? There's the people who want to uplift Black culture and the people who want to have association.
Exactly. Because when you think about it, whenever a Black person was present, a white person's value was raised. Think about it during slave times. If you had Black people in tow, your value was raised. And that has not changed much to this day.
I never thought about it that way. See, I'm learning things
today. Yeah, and like I'm very cognizant of that when I'm invited to do things. Like I see it happen all the time. Like somebody wants a Black person with them to come to this event, and sometimes it's for clout.
Well, that's what a lot of companies and brands are kind of doing right now, and I call it performative, project-based activism. Yeah. It's like it's performative, it's project-based on that thing, and then it's the activism at that time, and as soon as the project's done, but my whole thing about it is like, okay, where did you hire and embed and start putting people of diversity within your company at the executive level and start changing the landscape of what your company means, right? Rather than just doing a performative project, right? Yeah. And so that's the difference, right? And I think a lot of people are super caught up in the performative project-based activism. Yep,
absolutely. I 100% agree. And I feel like my job whenever I am on those sets is to, very politely disrupt and point out areas where, there is room for growth.
Or we can do more here, or we can do better, or have you thought about it this way, or we're going like that. And what does it mean to the talent or the person shooting the photo or the makeup artist? And I think that's one thing that's been really great about working with you, is making sure that we have diversity on set and people feel welcome and feel that they can like voice their concerns and they can talk about how they're being represented behind and in front of the camera, and people can like communicate it along the way, and there's a common ground, right? And so I think when you have more of that in those sets, like you're actually doing more thing, and the project takes on a whole nother sense. It's not just the project of the output of what it is, of like what shows up on the page, but it's an ethos that comes back into the industry about how people are hired and how they're working and what the work is done and that. And so when the advertising comes back into the industry, that's where the change actually is really starting to happen, right? And so when you look at that and you start seeing more companies of like Black-owned media, like Michael B. Jordan or Ava DuVernay, you know, like that, and they're running their companies, or Tyler Perry right there. That's the change. Right?
And I want to bring a space, and I love working with companies that are expansive and reflective of not just Black people, but I want to see Latin people, because I'm also Latina. I want to see Afro-Latin people, because a lot of times, like, West Side Story, they attempted to try to like, really reflect the Afro-Latinness, because there is a tendency that even when they are showing diversity, they whitewash it as much as they can. So because it makes white people, it's more palatable that way. The lighter that it is, you know what I mean? The lighter skin that you have, even if it is, you are diverse, you're going to look a lot more, identifiable as white than you are of like dark skin Black person, So I like to see that. I like to see people with disabilities. I love to see like the shoot that we just did. Like I was so happy, and I had the most brilliant conversations with so many people that were
an amazing talent and group of talent. Like,
the
people on that shoot were like amazing. It was an amazing group of people. Like I came away a better person from that. Right?
And I work with Starbucks a lot. I do a lot of their social media content, and they have made the effort to do things like that. For instance, one time I thought it was so amazing that they had a deaf actor. And by the way, there's no film. It's all stills. And they had a deaf actor, and they hired an interpreter to be with this deaf actor and model while they were on set. And I thought it was so amazing, because I just was like, a lot of companies wouldn't even go through the effort. They're trying to keep costs down. They're not going to bring an extra person on. You know what I mean? So then that actor wouldn't have the opportunity, because they're like, well, hiring this one deaf actor means hiring two people. You know what I mean? So I thought that was so lovely of them. And that was one of the sets that for the first time I saw, like, not just talent, but there was 4 Black women on set that were behind the camera as well. I had never
like that.
I had never seen that before.
I was like, oh shoot! One of the talent was like, "You're the first Black photographer I've ever worked with." And so I think people like underestimate the power in that, right? But one of the things I did want to talk to you about, like when you're talking about the makeup and artistry and how things have changed like that, is seeing like now the products that are coming onto market and coming onto line, and people like valuing diverse dollars, and just what kind of products and brands that you're working with to kind of like bring that view to the forefront.
Like I am really lucky. I was able to build these really great relationships with Maybelline, especially during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, like they were really generous, and they would invite me to their events, and they would send me lovely product of whatever they knew that was coming out. And then when I went to Cornell University to learn diversity, inclusion, equity, I ran a GoFundMe to help me be able to fund my schooling. And Maybelline was actually one of my largest donors.
That's awesome.
And then after that, they hired me to teach some diversity, inclusion, and equities, and speak in some of their forums and things like that. And it was so lovely. They were so grateful to me. They sent me a huge bouquet of flowers afterward. They were like, "You were really incredible." And I've been able to, work with them on, just consulting, just a little bit on how the industry can reflect diversity in meaningful ways. I've been able to do that for companies like Retrouvé, which is a great skincare company, high-end skincare company. I work with a really great brand called Le Métier du Beauté, and they use me for product development. I've been able to help them with their tones and like help them get it really right. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times it's just put a pumpkin in there, just orange, and I'm like, now I look like a Oompa Loompa, but okay. I've been able to work with them and help them fine tune their offerings for people of color. Been able to work with a great brand called Follow Beauty, and they've been able to link me up with companies like Dragon Beauty, which is run by an amazing trans woman. And, I've been able to do great product development for that, like helping them with their setting powders and naming, the tones and telling them, no, it needs to be like, if you have somebody that's really dark, like it's more of an eggplant tone as opposed to this, we want to, like these are ambers, these are, so really bringing, like taking out naming colors after, and that are for people of color after food, because that's a big no-no. And, helping them create language that is expressive of the tones that we favor as people of color and not insulting.
I mean,
so
that's great. I think, as we're coming to a wrap up, because that's a wealth of information, is if you were looking at this from a perspective of like trying to help someone, like, when you were talking about like you went on your own and you were trying to do that, what words of advice would you have for yourself now back then? Like, what would be like some guiding steps?
Well, I think that I was always very good at persisting no matter what, because I was like, if I stop, I'll be dead. And I'm not going to do that. But I think I wasted a lot of time, being very hard on myself and also thinking that it wasn't going to happen and just stressing out and worrying. And I've come to realize that worry is just something that you do when there's nothing left to do. And it makes you feel like you're doing something. Like I had no control. Like I sent the emails. I have my website updated. I have all these things due. And so instead of just being patient and waiting and finding a different and productive way to fill my time, I would fill my time with worry. And it always worked out. And I remember there's this movie that I saw called Bridge of Spies, and it's with Tom Hanks. And I loved it because I love anything that has to do with like World War II or like war and things like that. And it was about Tom Hanks being like this great negotiator. And he was a lawyer though. And he was representing this Russian spy that they found in America. And he was with him in the jail and he was explaining the gravity of his crimes. And he's like, well, you could go to jail for this and go for this long, you're this, and that. And the guy was just like, okay, all right. And he's like, do you never worry? Like, are you not worried about this? And he's like, would it help? And Tom Hanks goes, no, it actually wouldn't. So that's kind of my mindset now. I'm like, I could worry, but I know for a fact indulging in negative fantasies are not going to help me. So I try to use that time and fill that space with something positive now, because that is actually more attractive. Like going around and being fretful of like tomorrow, it's not attractive energy. It really doesn't attract good things. It just kind of attracts more of that. And and listen, like I'm not like this foo-foo, only positive thinking kind of person. I'm very grounded in reality because I am a Black woman, and I've been like, toxic positivity to death, by a lot of people not of color trying to be like, you just don't have the right mentality. But worry is something that I was really able to narrow in on, something that I didn't need to get me to the place that I needed to be.
Gotcha.
And so find other ways to fill that space when you feel like nothing is happening.
That's a very zen way of looking at things, and I haven't really like ever heard that as a tip, which is actually really cool because I think I'm gonna implement it because, God bless, I'm a warrior. Like, I ain't even gonna lie.
I know,
but like I'm working on it, so this is like maybe step 2 in the 10-step program.
I mean, it's always worked out, and I don't come from a lot. I don't come from a lot of money, but somehow I've always gotten a roof over my head. Somehow I've always got money in the bank. Somehow, like I figured it out, and I just needed to have more faith in myself instead of worrying that it was going to happen. I'm like, no, you're going to make it happen, Val. Like, and you don't have to worry about how it's going to happen. You don't have to think about that. I have faith in my network. I have faith in my friends. I have faith in the things that have gotten me to where I am now, like my talent and things like that. And so I put stock in that, reinvest in it, and just try not to indulge in negativity. And listen, there are days that it's easier to do that than others. So I'm not perfect at it. But as a rule, I try to like talk myself off that ledge and be like, Val, you know you can do this. You know that whatever is coming is coming. That job canceled because the universe is clearing out space for something better. And it really typically does. Like I do kind of get something that, you know.
On the show earlier today.
Exactly. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe, you know, like I think about all those times that I thought like it was the end of the world and like I was doomed and like I will never work again. And then I got a job. And I was like,
calm down.
Okay, I could skip. Exactly. Well, I grew up in a religion where everything was the end of the world. So I was very used to catastrophizing things. Fair. So I don't do that anymore. I had to unpack that, realize that that's where that was really coming from. Redirect, get Zen, figure out how to like calm myself and attract something better.
All right. That's a wrap.
Thanks for having me.
Dude, that was awesome.